My full name is Irene Maya Ota.
And when and where were you born?
I was born in Tokyo, Japan, May 9th, 1952, 5 years after the war ended.
Tell me a little bit about your family.
My family. Let's see, what can I say about my family? Well, my mother, born and raised in Japan, she remembers in high school, she remembers the bombing of Tokyo, the firebombing of Tokyo, and having to go down into the basement of her high school for those bombings. After the war officially ended in, I think, 46, 47, after the bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, she worked as a nanny for an army officer on a base that I don't think exists anymore in Tokyo, because her family is from Chibaken, which is just outside of Tokyo, a suburb outside of Tokyo. There she met my father. He is and I don't tell this story very often, so Japanese of me not to tell this story. No, you don't tell your own stories. My father was a young American Caucasian GI from Texas. And supposedly, love transcends all language barriers. They fell in love, they got married, they had me. And my dad, my biological father, and I'll tell you why I call him my biological father as we go along the story, you'll figure it out. He was stationed back to the States. And back in those days, and I don't even know, well, it's true for every war, I believe, the U.S. government didn't like the intermarriage with Japanese and the GIs, and the Japanese weren't real thrilled about that intermarriage, and they weren't real thrilled about children like me, the hafus, right, the half and halfus. But so my biological father got stationed back to the States, and he must have really wanted my mom and me to come, because it was pretty difficult, because we followed later. I was about 9 months old when we got to the States. I should have brought it. I have this beautiful passport. Yeah, it's really pretty. It's green brocade, stamped gold, embossed lettering, and in the front there's a little cutout of the cover. And that's where my passport number is written. It's written in ink. And our passport numbers now are, 25 digits. My passport number is 301. That's how many of us weren't coming over, right? Can you imagine? My passport number is 301. It just boggles my mind. Anyway, so we come. My father's in the Air Force, and of course we sail into San Francisco. We are in California, we're in Texas, and then he gets stationed at Hill Air Force Base in Ogden, Utah, and that's how we got there. When I'm 14 months old, he deserts us. He abandons us. We have no idea. My mom has no idea. So here's my mom, doesn't speak English, doesn't have a job, now doesn't have a husband, and has a 14-month-old baby. She can't go back to Japan, and so she gets help from the Japanese church in Ogden, and what they do is they arrange a marriage for her to a Japanese, and before I turned 2, 4 days before I turned 2, they got married, and so he's the only father I know, and so that's why I call him, the other guy, the biological father, because I don't know him. And lucky for me, for my phenotype, right, I can pass. Like, these are my parents. Nobody questions me growing up. And so I have 2 parents who don't speak English. So my father, stepfather, but I never called him that. He was always my father. He's what they call kibe. And Kibe is second generation, so I don't know if you know the generations. So Issei, Nisei, right?
Yeah.
So he's second generation. His parents came over from Japan. And then he was born in Sugar City, Idaho. But as was tradition, he was sent back to Japan to be raised. His mother died in the 1919 flu epidemic, the influenza epidemic, when he was 3, and his father, farmer, didn't know what to do with him. And so, but it was tradition, right, to send him to Japan to be raised. And so he was sent back to Japan at the age of 3 and didn't come back till he was 17, 18, done with high school. So in reality, my dad is Japanese, right? I just can't imagine being in Japan and not being a citizen, being a U.S. citizen, because Japan is real picky about that kind of stuff. And so my dad is basically doesn't speak English, doesn't know the culture, that you're navigating society with immigrant parents, with parents who don't speak the language, who don't understand the culture. And so my dad worked at Kennecott Copper. He was a miner when it was a real full-blown working mine. And so we moved from, he'd always lived in Salt Lake, so we moved to Salt Lake, but we moved to Japantown. And there, you spoke Japanese. There you had the markets and the stores that sold all the kinds of foods that you were familiar with. My mom did not like American food. She did not like American food. And so she learned to cook what she was used to eating, and she became very good. She became quite well known for her cooking, sort of famous for her cooking. And so that's how we got to Japantown. I was I must have been 2, yeah. I must have been close to 2. They got married 4 days before I turned 2, so. And so we moved to Japantown. So that's what I remember, right? My first early memories are my parents and Japantown.
So how long were you living in Japantown for?
Well, I lived there, and I think we moved when I was in the 1st grade, but we stayed close. And then in the 3rd grade, I moved to where my parents' house is now. That's Poplar Grove. At that time, it was predominantly white, predominantly Mormon, and it was not as developed. My house, the house that my parents bought, was on a block, but behind and all around were just fields. It was not developed with houses like it is now. There's houses everywhere. So it was always the low economic side of town. The people that sold the house to my parents had got permission from the neighbors to sell to a Japanese family. When I was looking through my mom's paperwork and stuff after she passed away, I found a covenant for the neighborhood, which seems strange to have a covenant for a low-income place. But it talks about the typical things. So it was A, B, C, D, E. E in the covenant said, no race but the Caucasian race will dwell in this house unless they are domestic servants. So he got permission from the neighbors to sell to a Japanese family. My friend, who lived 6 blocks away from me, said that happened to her family too, that they had to get permission. But we were always still connected to Japantown. That's where the church was that we went to, the Japanese Church of Christ. That's where still the stores were until they tore it down in 64, 65.
And how old were you when they tore it down? Do you remember?
No, let's do some math. Let's see. I was, 52, 64. So I was 12. Yeah, I was 12. When we first moved into that neighborhood and I went to my new school with my younger brother. My younger brother was 4 years younger than me. He passed away, but he was 4 years younger than me. The first thing we heard when we got to the playground was, hey, we've got some chinks at our school. And I knew three things. First, I knew chink was a derogatory word for Chinese. I knew I wasn't Chinese, but I knew they were talking about us, right? So that was a real kind of shock from where everyone around you was Japanese, and nobody, the schools I went to were, they had a good number of Japanese in them. We weren't unusual. Mm-hmm. They knew where we were from. They knew we were from Japantown. Yeah. So that's what I remember my first day at my new school. And then I also had to go into speech therapy classes because I spoke with a Japanese accent. My L's and R's were not good. And I remember going into the speech therapy classes because I spoke like my parents. My parents didn't even speak English very well, but I spoke English with a Japanese accent. And sometimes I'll slip. My L's and R's get, like Hillary Clinton can get difficult. Rural can be difficult. Yeah. Those kind of words where the L's and R's are close together and you kind of say it fast. My mouth gets twisted. Mm-hmm. I think the older I get, the less filters I have, and it just kind of comes out. Yeah. Because I don't think about it.
What was your favorite memory of Japantown?
My favorite memory of Japantown, I think it knowing everyone. I mean, we all lived across the street from there was something called Whitmore Court, and that's where most of us lived, and it was across the street from the Buddhist temple. And so it was knowing all the kids and knowing kids from the Buddhist temple and knowing kids from the Japanese Church of Christ and knowing and feeling familiar, right? Just that feeling of familiar, and that nothing was strange, and eating Japanese food wasn't strange. And the new school, people would say, "Oh, you're eating seaweed," and I never knew it was seaweed. It was nori, right? It was nori, and I said, "No, I'm eating nori." And they go, "Oh, Irene, you're eating seaweed, blah." And I'm like, "No, it's nori. I don't know what you're talking about." And it was later I found out, oh yeah, nori is seaweed, right? And so, yeah, in Japantown, right, church was always bilingual. Every time you had some kind of food event, it was always Japanese. Sushi was a norm. Before it became this big fad. We were always eating sushi, and my mom was known as for her sushi and cooking and stuff. And so, yeah. So my memory is just that feeling of familiarity, of not feeling different. That community, and knowing, it didn't matter if the kids were Buddhist or if they were Christian. They had community. So across the street from the Church of Christ was a building called the Manse, and another building that they owned, and they would have judo lessons there, and Japanese language classes there. And so I remember we would check out the boys doing judo. Yeah, we would check out the boys doing judo. Yeah.
Wow, that's really nice.
And basketball teams.
Yeah,
the Buddhist church had basketball teams, and the Japanese church had the what was it called? Well, it was a Japanese youth group. So we did things together and things like that. Yeah, so I think that's my favorite memory of just the familiarity, just a feeling of belonging, just a feeling of, we're not unusual, but.
So you were quite young. You were 12 years old. How did that make an impact on your identity, or as you were growing up? How did that change for you when Japantown was gone?
It didn't. Okay. It didn't change. My parents still were Japanese. I still didn't speak English well, and my mom still cooked Japanese foods, and we stayed in connection with families, Japanese families who also moved, and I don't think it's unusual that, so in grade school there were no Asians in my grade school, my elementary school, but once I got to junior high, that's where I met my other friend who lived 6 blocks away. She went to Franklin Elementary, I went to Edison. But immediately we became friends, and immediately our moms became friends, right? Her parents, her parents were actually interned, and that's what brought them to Salt Lake. So her parents had the internment experience, and they spoke English, and they knew how to navigate. And so my friend grew up very differently from the way I grew up, and had different experiences in navigating, right? Because, you know, my parents couldn't help me do anything. And I remember my sister, when my grandson started junior high, my daughter went with him to help him register and all that. And my sister, who's 7 years younger than me, says, "Oh, I don't remember Mom doing that." And I said, "That's because she didn't." Right? "Do you know who went with you? Do you remember it all?" "It was me. Right?
You can't forget that.
She forgot all about it. She goes, "I don't remember Mom coming." I said, "Yeah, well, you don't remember because she didn't do it." You know?
So, as a society, how do we bring inclusivity and presence?
Gee, that's a really good question. I wish I had the definite answer, and then I'd be rich and famous or whatever if I had that answer. I think respect. I think there's got to be a respect of other cultures, and understanding that, yeah, we're going to be different, but different doesn't have to mean bad. I think we really need to know our history. Our history is not pretty. It's not nice. It's painful. But if we don't know the history, how do we understand why things are the way they are now? And so I think we have to be honest and face our history. We have to be honest and face our own fears. What are they based on? We certainly haven't learned history through our schools here, K through 12. We learn a very narrow Eurocentric history. I mean, I don't even remember being told about the internment camps, and we had one in Salt Lake. Not Salt Lake, but in Utah, in Delta. I don't remember being told about that. I don't remember being told. This is what I remember about the bombing of Hiroshima. They don't teach it anymore. They don't say it anymore that I know of, but we were taught that it was a pilot from Utah who named the plane that dropped the bomb after his mother, the Enola Gay. Wow. Yeah. So we learned that, like, it was I should be proud. Right? It was the a pilot from Utah named a plane after his mother and dropped the bomb on Hiroshima. Like, okay. I don't think they teach that anymore.
Yeah, I don't remember that.
But this is back in the 60s, right? Yeah. When we weren't as sensitive. Mm-hmm. So, inclusion, I don't know, and understanding and acceptance. I mean, even an acceptance, though, seems conditional, right? I'll accept you, like there's something to accept. Mm-hmm. So I wish I had the answer. I really do, because then I'd have my children be more included, and my grandchildren be more included and accepted and respected, and because they're not. Because they're not.
What does it mean to be a Japanese American?
Mm-hmm. Well, it means that you're foreign. It means that people see you as a threat because of the model minority stereotype. You're so smart, right? You're so smart, especially in math and science. And that's threatening. I did a research paper for one of my classes about the discourse that surrounds Asian bodies. So it's not just Japanese, because dominant society doesn't tell the difference between Japanese, Chinese, or Korean, or Vietnamese, though some will say, "Oh, I can tell. I've been mistaken for Chinese a lot." I'm glad you can tell.
Like, what does that really mean?
No, because you look Chinese. Okay.
Yeah, like what does that mean?
All right. You don't speak Chinese? No.
Yeah.
So you're always, I feel like I'm always being tested. Well, how Japanese are you? You don't speak Japanese? You're not smart in math? You're kind of loud. That's not what Japanese is, right? They're quiet, particularly the women. And I'm loud. And I swear a lot. And so it's like that's what it means, is that you're always kept off balance about when you're navigating in a predominantly white space.
What message do you have for the community at large about Japantown?
Yeah. Nothing can bring it back. And I know there are people who want to bring it back. Nothing's going to bring it back. The Salt Palace, right, plopped itself on there, and they're encroaching. And they actually have been trying for years and years and years to get rid of the churches there. They've got the one block is Japantown Street. Japantown was much bigger than one block. Went from like 2nd South to North Temple, from 4th West to State Street. It was much bigger than that one little block that they're calling Japantown Street. Now they want to build this big high-rise in a parking lot, and it's just gonna it's just really sad. It's really sad. And they tried to do that Chinatown on State Street in 33rd, 35th. You can't create it. Japantown happened because of segregation, discrimination, prejudice, and fear. That's exactly how Japantown got started. No, you're not going to live next to us. No, you're not going to live with white Americans. No, you're not doing that. I mean, all the incoming immigrants were in that area, right? When the Greeks first came, when the Italians first came, when the Chinese came, when Japanese came, that's where you went. And then I've done some critical space theory readings, and what happens, it can become a third space. So it's not in the very good part of town. The railroad was still working, but then it becomes a magnet space where Japanese immigrants will come. I mean, Topaz, right when Topaz was ended, the camp was ended, where were they supposed to go with $25, right? So they went to Japantown because they couldn't go anywhere else. They're the enemy, right? I remember the stores. I remember the community, the feeling of community there. I remember the Pagoda restaurant was there. Sage Farm Market, I think that's the only store that still exists. It's on 15th South in Maine. But Sage Farm Market was there. A tofu shop was there. Family Market that sold the fresh fish was there. I mean, it's gone, and you can't bring it back. You're not going to bring it back there. That space now, there's the place where the jazz play now. You think they're going to get rid of all that to rebuild Japantown? I don't think so. And we'll see if that high-rise multi-development is stopped. I'm going to say it's going to be built. I'm going to say where there's money involved, people don't care about Japantown. Yeah, it could have been a thriving, like Chinatowns in San Francisco and New York are now big tourist destinations, right? But again, it wasn't, so it was the bad part of town. I'm just going to tell you that I remember. So I also remember mice where we lived, and I remember my mom setting traps and just hoping and praying she didn't catch anything. Don't catch any mice. Don't. Yeah, you couldn't go down by the railroad because it was a working railroad at that time. It's not anymore, but yeah, I think, yeah. you lost. Salt Lake lost something important. That's what I think. And you can't bring it back.